If it needs to be lifted, there is a crane designed to do the job both efficiently and safely. This video deals with overhead cranes. These types of cranes are commonly used for materials handling in the manufacturing and transport industries. Some common examples include gantry cranes, overhead travelling bridge cranes, container cranes, and jib cranes. While many overhead cranes are controlled from floor-operated pendant or radio controls, cranes that operate at high speed, lift large loads, or operate in congested areas are usually cabin controlled. The incorrect operation of overhead cranes can lead to serious accidents, and it is therefore vital that you pay close attention to the following safety guidelines. In particular, we'll be looking at regulations and licensing, pre-operation checks, the need to plan your work, correct operating procedures, slinging practices, signaling and communication, and shutdown procedures. The use of power cranes is generally governed by statutory regulation. Before operating any power crane, you should check with the relevant regulatory authorities for details of crane regulations and licensing requirements. Prior to operating a crane, make sure that you are totally familiar with its controls. In an emergency, you must be able to react quickly. Know the location of the main isolating switch and the emergency stop buttons. Operating instructions for each crane should incorporate the manufacturer's latest recommendations. Take the time to find them and read them. These instructions have been designed with safety as a primary consideration. Before commencing your shift, you should give the crane a thorough pre-operational check in accordance with the checklist provided in the operating instructions. Before power has been applied to your crane, you should firstly check to see that the crane is not tagged out of service, that the main isolating switch is off. Check that the safe working load notice is displayed on the crane. If this notice has been removed or defaced, then it should be immediately replaced. Give the crane an overall check for any damage. Leakage of oil from gearboxes and hydraulic systems is an indication of possible wear or damage. Guards and equipment covers should be inspected to see that they are in place and not bent or broken. Check for any distortion or wear to hooks, ropes, and sheaves. The hoist rope must be spooled correctly on the rope drum and not crossed or lying in the wrong grooves. Brakes should also be checked regularly to see that they're in good condition and that the brake pads are not worn. With jib hoists, if the load moves along the beam without your help, it's out of alignment and needs repairing. Pendant control should also be checked for wear or damage. In the case of cabin-controlled cranes, make sure that the cabin is in a tidy condition with tools and materials properly stored. Grease, oil spills and debris on floors, access areas and ladders can be hazardous and should be removed. Also check to see that the fire extinguisher is in place and satisfactory for use. Before engaging the power, make sure that auxiliary isolators are in the off position, that all controls are in neutral, and that the travel and traverse rails are free of obstructions and faults. Once the power has been applied, firstly, check the operation of the stop button. Then operate the crane or hoist through all motions and pay particular attention to the brakes. The tracking hoist should be smooth. Be alert all the time for signs of machine faults. Odd noises, smoke emissions and irregular movements of the crane are signs of faulty equipment. Check the operation of all motion limit switches or cutouts. If a limit switch fails, then apply the brake and throw the main switch to off. Also check the operation of audible warning devices, such as the bell. Hoisting rope should be the correct size, type and construction as specified by the crane manufacturer. Make sure you know the loading capacity of the hoist ropes which you're working with. Ropes, sheaves and drums should be inspected regularly for wear, damage and corrosion. Frayed ropes can be quickly identified by wiping a rag up and down the rope. If you notice any broken or damaged strands, then inform your supervisor and maintenance personnel. Wire hoisting ropes should be cleaned and lubricated regularly to prevent corrosion, wear from friction and drying out of the core. Sheaves should also be lubricated regularly. Crane hooks should not be loaded beyond their safe working capacity. Make sure that you check the load capacity of your hooks and chains before attempting the lift. To prevent displacement of the sling or load, the hook should be provided with a safety catch or other effective device to minimize the risk of the sling or load becoming detached. If the safety catch is broken or bent, then immediately have it repaired or replace the hook. Hooks should be inspected regularly for any signs of wear or damage, and the throat opening of the hook measured to see that widening of the throat has not occurred. In the event of a fault being revealed by the pre-operation check, or if during operation an abnormal noise or movement occurs, report the matter immediately to your supervisor and do not use the crane until the fault or unsafe condition has been rectified. The crane isolator should also be tagged to warn people not to use the crane until it is repaired. The tag needs to be signed by the person who detected the fault and should only be removed by that person or a qualified crane maintenance person. If you do not have a written checklist, then pause this video and make a note of these important items. As a final pre-operation check, you should conduct a trial lift to ensure that the electromagnetic or other hoist rope braking system is working correctly. Choose a near capacity load and raise it just off the ground. After checking for any brake slippage, raise the load up about 1 meter and recheck for slippage. Finally, lower the load till it's just off the ground, reapply the brake and check for movement. If you notice any slippage, then do not use the crane. Place an out-of-service tag on the main switch and report the problem to your supervisor. Prior to commencing work, it is important that you, as an operator, develop an operating plan in consultation with your supervisor and other relevant personnel. A key part of this plan is to ensure that the overhead cranes in your work area are suitable and have the capacity to lift the intended loads. The plan should take account of job requirements, work priorities, workplace rules and procedures, and potential site hazards. Some common site hazards which you need to be aware of include pedestrian and vehicle pathways, clearance from other structures, equipment and electrical conductors, proximity to dangerous materials, and in the case of outside cranes, potential wind forces and adverse weather conditions. The operating plan should also ensure that the work area is well illuminated. It's important not to exceed the rated working load of the crane. The safe load capacity is the maximum load which should be lifted. If this load is exceeded, then it could lead to mechanical and structural failure. Always remember, incorrect operation of your crane can result in overloading, even though the weight of the load is within the crane's rated capacity. For example, shock loading by stopping or starting too quickly can result in an overload. Make sure that you correctly estimate the weight of the load and assess its center of gravity. The load must be within the safe working capacity of the crane which is to be used. The correct sling configuration and choice of lifting gear should then be decided upon. There are many types of slings and lifting attachments which are available. Make sure that you use the correct sling or attachment for the type of material or object which is to be lifted. The common types of lifting slings are chain slings, wire rope slings, and fibre slings. Fibre slings will be either natural or synthetic. The type of sling selected should take into account the weight, size and shape of the load, the attachment method, and the possibility of damage to the load or slings. The sling angle must also be taken into account when selecting slings. An increased angle between the legs of a sling will reduce the load capacity of the sling. This is due to horizontal tension being added to vertical tension as the angle increases. In this example, we see that a 1,000 kilogram weight slung at an angle of 90 degrees results in 707 kilograms of load being borne on each leg of the sling. When the angle increases to 120 degrees, we see that each leg of the sling is carrying 1,000 kilograms. In other words, the horizontal and vertical tension has increased to a point where each leg of the sling is suffering the total weight of the load. This shows that it's easy to overload the sling, even though you don't have a maximum capacity load. If you're creating unsafe sling angles with slings that are too short, then get a longer sling. Make a point of consulting the manufacturer's instructions and tables concerning rated sling capacities. You should get into the habit of inspecting your lifting gear at the beginning of each shift and before you use it. Remember, it's your responsibility to carry out this daily inspection, and if you notice a problem, then report it to your supervisor, and do not use the faulty or worn piece of equipment until it's repaired or replaced. While you should always carry out a visual inspection for wear or damage prior to using a sling, comprehensive inspections must be carried out at least once every 3 months. If any defects are identified, then they should be clearly marked and the sling withdrawn from service until repaired. A sling inspection card should be kept for each sling. Slings and attachments should be stored on frames or wall racks in a clean, dry place away from direct sunlight. Before attaching the load, the crane should be positioned directly above the load so as to avoid swinging the load as the lift is started. Likewise, when depositing a load, do not swing it to reach a location which is not under the unit. Cranes must not be used for side pulls or hoisting off vertical, as this could pull the winch rope out of position on the winch drum, causing damage to the rope. Checks must also be made to see that the load is correctly slung. If the weight of the load is not evenly distributed, then the load should be lowered and the slings reconfigured or other corrective action taken. Take the time to check that the lifting equipment is functioning properly. Make sure that the sling is free of twists and protected from sharp corners on the load. Protect your chains and slings by padding the sharp areas or padding the slings. Make sure that the load does not land on the sling, as the weight of the load could damage the sling. Do not use the crane to pull a sling from under a load, and never use the crane hoist rope or chain as a sling. Avoid tying knots in the sling, as this reduces its lifting capacity by half and adds to the stress and wear on the sling. Remember that whenever you carry out a lift, it is essential to double-check the security and stability of the load and to make sure that the weight of the load is evenly distributed. As an operator, this is your responsibility. When operating an overhead crane, it is important to adhere to the following safe work practices. Gently take up any slack before the load is lifted. Make sure that everyone in the immediate vicinity is clear of the load and aware that a load is being moved. Control should be moved smoothly and gradually to avoid abrupt, jerky movements which may cause the load to swing unduly. Never leave a load unattended, even for a short period. Ensure that the hook or load is sufficiently raised to avoid collision with any object during horizontal movement. When a load has been suspended, it is vital that no one stands under the load. Anything could happen, so don't take the risk. When engaging the crane with end stops, do so gently. Continuous impact may cause the stops to weaken and eventually fail, possibly causing the crane to derail. Always lift the load using the center of the hook, where it's designed to take the weight of the load. Lifting the load off-center can stretch the hook. Remember not to overcrowd a hook. Where multiple slings are being used, they should be attached to a shackle, which is then placed on the hook. This prevents the danger of the hook being strained owing to the spread of the slings, and also the danger of a sling fouling the safety catch or slipping over the point of the hook. Never place the hook block on the ground or the load. This releases tension on the hoist rope and can result in the rope bird caging on the winch drum. When traveling with the load suspended, acceleration and braking motion should be applied gently to minimize load swing. Tag lines can also be used to prevent pendulum motion of the load and enable the crane chaser to keep a safe distance. Remember to travel with the load as close to the ground as possible and keep your speed to a minimum. When a crane is under pendant control, you should maintain a sufficiently close relationship with the load to ensure good visibility and safe handling. If this is not possible, then proceed only under the direction of a dogger. Where a crane chaser or dogger is employed, it is their responsibility to direct the crane operator and ensure that the load clears all obstructions. Before signaling the crane operator to raise a load, the chaser or dogger should check to see that the load is securely attached to the crane, that no part of the load is loose or attached to some other object, and that the position where the load is to be placed is ready to receive it. There are standard hand and whistle signals which should be adopted at all times. As a general rule, only one hand should be used for signals, and only one designated person should give these signals at any one time. There should also be a card displaying these signals in your work area. Apart from the stop signal, operators should not respond to signals unless they are clearly understood. The operator should wait for a clear signal. Are you familiar with the correct shutdown procedure for your overhead crane? A crane must not be left unattended, even for short periods, unless the following steps are taken. Firstly, lower the load and remove it from the hook. The hook should then be raised to a safe level. Place controls in neutral. Where applicable, the crane isolator power supply should be switched off. A full shutdown will of course involve turning off the main isolator power supply and securing the unit. Remember to position the crane in its correct parking area and clear of any obstructions. Before going off duty, you should notify your supervisor about any irregularities concerning the operation of the crane. We have seen that there are a number of important safety principles which need to be followed in the day-to-day operation of your crane. Remember to inspect your equipment every day before using it. Follow the manufacturer's safety guidelines and always operate your crane carefully and safely. By following the safety procedures and practices outlined in this video, you will help to reduce the risks associated with the operation of overhead cranes in your work environment.